My name is Tom, and I am a follower of Jesus Christ who is powerless over alcohol and my tendency to do the wrong thing at the wrong time and in the wrong way and at the wrong place. But by God's grace today, I get to choose recovery. Let's pray. Father God, we're reminded that it is because of you that our mess becomes a message. We're reminded that you use our lives to reflect your grace and your power. So as we spend this time together, let these words glorify you. May it point those who seek you ever more closely so that we may all enjoy your grace, your power, your mercy, and your love. All in the name of your Son, Jesus Christ. Amen. In the summer of 1983, I had just turned 30 years old. You can tell that's been a while ago. But my life was over. I was physically, spiritually, morally, and mentally bankrupt. I looked, smelled, acted, and thought exactly like the chronic drunk that I was. My driving privileges were permanently revoked. I was unemployed and unemployable. I had been arrested many times for alcohol-related offenses. I weighed 120 pounds as opposed to 145, 150 that I weigh now. I did not bathe regularly, and I was living as a very much unwanted guest in my soon-to-be ex-wife and daughter's apartment. Now, looking back, I guarantee you that when I was 10, 11, 12, that was kind of age, and I was thinking about what I wanted to be when I grow up, that was not it. And the staggering thing to me was that at that time, in that summer, I had no solutions and I didn't want any. It is my hope that by fleshing this story out a little, you'll be able to see that this story, my story, like so many others, is a testament to God's grace, mercy, forgiveness, patience, and love. So I'm going to go back kind of to the beginning. My mother was a sometimes rebellious daughter of a Methodist preacher. My father, I don't know much about except that they were divorced and he was gone by the time I was 2 years old. And because of my mother's lifestyle choices, my two older sisters, I had a couple of those, we were raised pretty inconsistently. Sometimes stable, sometimes in the church, but mostly not. There were occasionally father figures, but mostly not. And my mother's choice of companions and husbands, and she had several, was not particularly good. God bless her. She did the best she could with what she had. And she loved us, and she worked hard to try to raise and support us. But her bad choices and lifestyle choices did impact our lives. Now, it was during one of those times when we were going to church, one of those in church times, that I did experience God for the very first time. And I was 10 or 11 years old, and we were at a revival in my grandfather's Methodist church, and I felt something move when they called for the altar, and I went forward, and I really sensed and felt something. And I remember that moment to this day. And so for the next year or so, 10, 11, 12 years old, I tried to figure out what I was supposed to do, what it meant to be a, quote, Christian. I was confused, and I did not understand what happened or what it meant. So I drifted away after a while. Well, my mother fell in love again. And we moved from a small town in southwest Missouri, I'm talking about 1,000 people, to Bergen County, New Jersey, just outside of Manhattan. Now, you want to talk about a culture shock, there you have it. And I was an immature 13-year-old kid, and I didn't handle any of that well at all. You see, I was absolutely sure I didn't fit in, which, given the circumstances, I probably didn't. I thought I was homely, and I thought I talked funny, which I probably did. I didn't feel like I belonged there, but more importantly, I had that ongoing nagging feeling of not feeling I belonged anywhere. That sense of not belonging or fitting plagued me all of my life up to that point. And I'll be real honest with you, every once in a while, I still have that feeling. That's why I'm so grateful for these fellowships. But I digress. You see, at that age, from the age of 13 to 20 or so, I was becoming angry, empty, and lost. And I had to start filling that void with something. And I actually started out sniffing glue. And then I found booze a little later on. And then I found women, sex. And I started a long run of bad choices, but just as importantly, I gave bad responses to the consequences of those bad choices. I used to say that there was no bad situation I couldn't make worse. Anybody been there for that one? And that wasn't just a little season in my life, that went on for years, including moving from place to place and starting to encounter all of the things that we get as active alcoholics. You know, I had moved from New Jersey to Missouri, Missouri back to New Jersey, and then I wound up here in Florida. In that time, I had collected 3 DUIs. I was permanently revoked in the state of Missouri. But more importantly, all those physical things, I was becoming hopeless, helpless, useless alcoholic, living as a guest in my first wife's apartment in Pine Manor. I had a 3-year-old daughter that I didn't have a clue how to be a father to. I did not know how to live life except to drink, and that's all I did. And throughout that entire time, I had gone to counselors. I'd gone to churches and psychiatrists seeking help, but I wasn't willing to face there's one simple fact that the problem was me. Later on, after I'd been brought into recovery, I was in recovery about a year or two, I worked at that same detox that I had been into 2 or 3 times. Once I'd even gone in voluntarily. The other 2 times, I think it had to do with handcuffs. But anyway, I managed to access the file I had from when I was in there, and on the very bottom, underlined in bold letters, was this statement: this client doesn't want to change. I hated what I was, but I did not want to change. I truly was hopeless. And my only prayer at that time in my life was not for hope, not for help. My only prayer was for God to end my life. And that was a legitimate, honest prayer. I was done. And then God answered that prayer. That life is done. And it happened to come about through that same detox that I had been into a couple of times before. And then, who would have thunk it? The program of Alcoholics Anonymous, which I had also been to before in my time running and gunning. But I began at that detox at an AA meeting, and in this very hopeless seeming situation, I received the gift of hope. I started to believe something was possible. I didn't know what, but I knew that somehow something was ending and that that something new was happening. And I didn't have the first clue what it was. So then I started going to Alcoholics Anonymous meetings. And I started learning about how to live sober. And I had to start relying on God for my sobriety. I've said it very, very much as an important part of my life, that my sobriety is by the grace of God. I believe in the things, the activities we do, the meetings, the steps, all of this But apart from the grace of God, that doesn't do anything for me. I realized that I had to rely on God for sobriety, and I had to be willing to change. Would you like to know how scary that is for a guy like me? Maybe some of you too. You know, change is okay for them, but not for me. I'm fine. But when I came to the point where I was not only hopeless, I had no new ideas, then I became willing to change. And I was given that gift of sobriety, and I got involved in Alcoholics Anonymous. I made a decision to turn a life that I really didn't know much about over to a God that I didn't understand at all. Steps 1, 2, 3. I was powerless. I knew something could fix me. I made a decision to turn my life and will over to the care of something that I didn't understand, and I really didn't know what I was doing, but I did it anyway. And I worked through the steps with a sponsor. And I continued to study and work the steps. I went to step meetings. I went to big book meetings. I went to everything. And I worked and I went to tons of meetings. And I was involved in service work very, very early on. It wasn't because I was so good, it's because I was so desperate. I served because they said that's what you do. The people who went before me and helped me said, here, go do this. Well, I didn't know any better, so I went and did this. I facilitated meetings at that same detox. I cooked breakfast at a local club for Sunday morning meetings, whatever. And then I met this lovely lady named Barbara. I met her and because she was in Al-Anon and had been for some time, and we started dating. You'd think she'd know better having been in Al-Anon, but we dated anyway. And we started going to this really nice little church over here in Cape Coral, and we got involved there. And we got married there in a Christian ceremony, which didn't go too well with her Jewish mother, but that's what happened. And we were busy building a sober life. And all through this time, following the steps, working sponsor, I was trying to live sober. I was trying to figure out what it really meant to be a Christian. I had said I had accepted Christ, but no, I was going through the motions of being a Christian. I still wasn't even sure what that meant. I was trying to learn how to be a father to my daughter and a stepfather to my stepdaughter. And I was going through the process of trying to grow up. You know, the biggest problem I had when I got sober is I was 30 going on 13. I had the emotional sobriety or emotional maturity of a 13-year-old. So I had all that growing up to do all the time we were doing this other stuff. I'm going to sidetrack just a little bit because I started to realize, because of inventory and working with a sponsor, that sex had been an issue throughout my life. My relationships with women were always strongly based in sex and always codependent. So consequently, before I married Barbara, I was involved in a lot of relationships, but I knew very, very little about actually how to love. There was also a bit of a problem with pornography during our marriage, in print, film, or in the internet. And that was a problem in the marriage, though in a technical sense, I remained faithful to Barbara until the last of her life. You see, I looked at the sexual issue. I discussed it with my sponsor even, but I did not actually face it. We'd been married for about 8 years. She started developing these really unusual symptoms, which turned out to be a neurological disease similar to Lou Gehrig's disease. And over the next 18 months or so she deteriorated physically until in April 17, 1997, she died. I was not prepared for that, even though you could see it coming. My wife was gone, my happy, sober dreams were gone, and what faith I had in Jesus, what little there was gone. I was left the grief, the guilt, the bills I couldn't manage, and it started to explode the sexual addiction. And I went along, now, let me stop here for a second. I did not drink over that. That's why I say I'm sober by God's grace. Because if it was true that my sobriety was based upon me maintaining my spiritual condition, I was in trouble. But God's grace, I did not pick up a drink over that. But the sexual addiction started to grow, and I went along like that for a couple of years. And though the church that we were attending was great, the folks in AA were great, I was still doing things on my own power. You see, I knew somewhere inside me that if I just did all the right stuff, maybe I'd be okay. I was placing my faith in what I could do instead of my faith in the God of grace. So after a couple of years, another lady came along, and I handled that relationship with exactly the same relational skills I had always used, which led to a divorce, a marriage and a divorce after about a year. I, to this day, regret those decisions that led to that, but it is part of my story. You see, God even used those sins and shortcomings to start bringing me into a real relationship with Jesus Christ. See, God even used my sins and my shortcomings to draw me back. You know, that is why I wound up here. Choose what was Celebrate Recovery then. It's because somebody told me, hey, they got a meeting for guys who have a problem with pornography and stuff. So I started come to that meeting. If I remember right, it was Bill who told me that. And I started coming here to the men's sexual integrity group, and I started my recovery from sexual addiction. You see, in that whole time, the 39 years or so, I've experienced sober marriage, then losing that wife through death, and then a failed marriage, and now I am experiencing life differently because it's based in a relationship with Jesus Christ, not in all the things I think I can do or cannot do. I believe in working the steps. Absolutely. They are the program of recovery. I believe in going to meetings. I believe and trust in relying on each other and accountability partners and sponsors. These things are integral. But for me, for this man in recovery, it all comes down to my reliance upon a power greater than myself, whose name is Jesus Christ. You see, I faced all those failures, not just in prior to recovery, but in recovery. There was a picture there. One of the pictures shows me with a white furball dog. Her name was Libby. And Libby is the reason I'm married today. Because Libby liked treats. And I had a motorcycle, I had a job, I was coming to Celebrate Recovery, and I lived in a mobile home park on Slater Road. And I had Libby. And Libby and I went for walks. Libby found out that this trailer right around the corner from me, there lived a lady who had treats. Guess what? Libby liked treats. So every day, Libby would head over to see, you know it, you guessed it, Bonnie. And we started talking, and we started getting to know each other, and she had a little dog too, and so that started out, we started talking, eventually we started dating. I confess that I did not handle that any better than I had before, but because of Celebrate Recovery and God's grace, we put that relationship on a godly footing and kept it that way until we married in 2005. And we have been involved with Celebrate, now Choose Recovery, ever since then. I've been involved in service in some areas together. I have been involved in teaching and doing different things here, but it is all by the grace of God. I continue to try to live this program to the best of my ability each day, but my dependence is no longer upon what I do. The Big Book Alcoholics Anonymous says that we are not cured. What we have is a daily reprieve contingent upon the maintenance of our spiritual condition. And for me, that's my relationship with Jesus Christ. And that's ongoing, and it is continual. And I try to live that out on a daily basis, not by starting out by doing all the right things, but starting out on my knees. And if not on my knees, at least bowed before my God, learning and growing in Jesus Christ. My wife Bonnie and I felt a call to ministry many years ago, and I thought it would be some kind of pastoral ministry, but it turned out that what I wound up getting called to was an assisted living facility over here in Cape Coral. And for 11 years now, 12? Every Sunday, whenever we could, we take a worship service into that assisted living facility. And that is something we continue to do. Why? Because God's grace allowed me to come into sobriety. Because God's grace walked with me through all of my ups and downs, my successes and failures in recovery. Because God's grace allowed me to continue to grow in a relationship with Him. And for that reason, I am allowed to continue to be of service to God, my Father, and to my fellow man, whether it's in recovery or out of recovery. By way of closing, I'm reminded that my very life is because of Jesus Christ. That power, whatever it was that brought me into recovery that I couldn't acknowledge as Jesus Christ in the beginning, that same power is the same power that brought me to recovery and brought me to my knees at the foot of the cross of Jesus Christ. It's His grace. It's His power. So I continue today. My wife and I continue to serve. I serve where I can, when I can. I continue to live a sober life. I continue to realize I still got a long way to go on this journey. I just turned 70 years old, and I realized that I'm not near there yet. And if God were to come and take me home tonight, I'm okay with that because of Jesus. But if not, then I know and trust that God will continue to use me, just as He does every human being He brings into recovery. And by His grace, no matter where a person's been or what a person has done, as we say in our literature, a new life is possible. And a life of purpose, of service. Plus, I get to be married to a really cool lady all the same, and my relationship with my daughter is better than it's ever been. I give you thanks for allowing me to share this testimony. God bless you. You want this?